Number 5 on this list is SCP-513. SCP-513 is a very rusty cowbell that cannot be cleaned off no matter how hard somebody tries. This cowbell is extremely dangerous and must be locked up, and especially never rung. If this bell is rung, then all those within a 120-foot radius of this ring, they're in for some trouble. The second that you hear this ring, you will become cursed. You may not be aware that you're cursed at first because the early symptoms are simply anxiety and the feeling that someone's watching you, but that stage of the curse goes by fast because within an hour you're gonna start to catch glimpses of SCP-513-1. SCP-513-1 is a very tall and slender humanoid figure that's limbs are far too long for its body. It's kind of similar to Slenderman, but the length of its limbs make it a little bit more unsettling to look at. An hour after this ring, this creature is going to begin appearing. You may see it as you pass by a mirror or as you turn a corner. If you ever make direct eye contact with it, then it's going to vanish just as quickly as it appeared. This curse is going to stay with someone forever, and no one else is going to be able to help you or even see what you're going through. This causes those who are cursed to experience severe sleep deprivation and slowly lose their minds. Many victims will eventually take their own lives because they believe it's the only way out of this walking nightmare. Something that has this ability needs to get locked away forever. Ideally, it should even be destroyed, but considering we can't even get the rust off of it, I would assume it's probably impenetrable. If anyone with ill intentions got a hold of this bell and started ringing it in a crowded area like a city or a mall, then all hell would break loose. If it was up to me, then this thing is getting locked up in the deepest vault possible, and then we're throwing away the key. Number 4 on this list is SCP-572. SCP-572 is a sword. It's not the type of sword that you'd want to use though, because it honestly kind of sucks. The Foundation writes, the weapon is badly balanced for combat use, is made of substandard steel, and does not hold an effective combat edge. So really not the type of weapon that you'd want to take into a fight unless it was your last option. But it's that exact reason why its curse is so dangerous. The Foundation goes on to say, the weapon has the unusual psychotropic quality of convincing any person who holds it of its balance and cutting power, as well as conferring feelings of great strength and invincibility. Basically, if you hold this sword, you automatically start thinking that you're some type of sword god, when really you're just holding a long rusty butter knife. This overconfidence is said to lead people into performing very dangerous stunts with this sword. They'll try to cut a car in half as it's going full speed at them, try and slice a bullet in two as it's being shot at them, attempt to fight actual trained professionals with far more experience and way better weapons. As you can imagine, all of these things don't end very well for those who attempt them. Many people who end up with this sword either end up dying in some gruesome way from their own overconfidence, or at the very least get maimed horribly and barely survive. The worst part about this sword as well is that once you're holding onto it, you refuse to give it up. Kind of like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, this sword is said to appeal to the holder's greed, and they just refuse to let it go. An item like this is simply too dangerous to be out in the world. It's just one big disaster waiting to happen. Lock it away and keep it there forever. Number 3 on this list is SCP-2307-1. SCP-23071 is definitely a weird one. It isn't as dangerous as some of the other entries on this list, but it definitely needs to be kept locked away if possible. The Foundation describes it as the remains of a long sword with a 56cm hilt and a partial blade approximately 40cm in length, estimated to be approximately 43% of its original size. Carbon dating has shown that the hilt and crossguard of the sword date to approximately the 4th century CE. However, the metal used in the blade dates to approximately 3.2 billion BCE. SCP-23071 is in a severe state of disrepair as a result of being submerged in water for at least 1,300 years. So once again guys, we're dealing with a sword that really isn't too much to look at all. But similarly to our last sword entry, something very strange happens when somebody touches the hilt of said sword. The Foundation writes, SCP-23071's primary anomaly manifests when a subject makes contact with the hilt of the sword. Following this, all records pertaining to the subject will gradually distort in a manner that reflects positively on the subject, giving wildly different accounts of their life over a period of time. It starts slow, but basically over the course of several years, everything that is known about you is going to change. Your birth certificate will be inaccurate, your bank statements will be wrong, your name is going to change. Every single thing that indicates who you are will have changed without you doing anything about it. When you die, your death certificate will be wrong as well. No one will have known who you were or what you did because your whole life story is going to be documented with a bunch of lies. Like I said, it's not the most dangerous on this list, but also something that we don't really need happening to people on the regular. Number 2 on this list is SCP-3008. SCP-3008 may just be the strangest SCP that I've ever come across. There are multiple things that go on with this SCP, but the Foundation's initial description of it is a large retail unit previously owned by and branded as IKEA, a popular furniture retail chain. They go on to write that the inside of the store is a space resembling the inside of an IKEA furniture store, extending far beyond the limits of what could physically be contained within the dimensions of the retail unit. Current measurements indicate an area of at least 10 kilometers squared with no visible external terminators detected in any direction. So this item is actually a massive IKEA store that from the outside looks like a normal IKEA. This SCP gets even weirder though. There are apparently people who are trapped inside this massive SCP who have actually been there long enough to have built settlements and a small society. And these people who are trapped inside this IKEA have to regularly defend themselves against these humanoid entities that resemble IKEA workers but have no facial features and become extremely violent at nighttime. I should also note that it's very difficult to leave the IKEA once you get trapped inside because the exits continually move around the store at unknown times. So if that's not the craziest SCP that you've ever heard of, then I actually don't know what is. But luckily for us, SCP-3008 is currently contained and it has to stay that way. We have no idea how many people are currently trapped inside this IKEA and how many have died in there. If this IKEA was ever not contained and it was just on the street, then one simple trip to go get a new bath curtain could completely change your life forever. Hopefully one day all of the people currently trapped in there can escape, but for now, we need to keep that thing locked up. Number 1 on this list is SCP-666. SCP-666 is a strange one because it's only very dangerous to some individuals. It's described by the Foundation as a medium-sized Tibetan yurt made of tied wooden branches and covered in yak leather. The interior ceiling is 2.44 meters high and the base of the yurt is 9.14 meters. The hut is circular in shape. The interior of the yurt has a dirt floor and appears to be as crude as the outside to the majority of observers. The branches that make up the yurt frame are wrapped in rabbit fur and tied with yak leather thongs. So basically we just have a standard yurt. For many people this yurt will cause no problems at all and one can stay in it as long as they like. However, if someone who has or has had a substance abuse problem goes into the yurt, then some very bad things will happen. SCP-6661 is an entity that is said to appear to those who've dealt with substance abuse problems. This entity will attempt to get that individual to give into their past vices and get them to once again take whatever substance they had a problem with. The person who's in the yurt also can't simply leave because the second they get in there, the whole environment changes to something else. If the person gives into this entity and does take said substance, then the entity gets very violent and often leads to that person's death. This whole thing is really scary and it's really wrong. It seems like this demon creature wants to incite chaos and cause harm to this select group of people. Currently, SCP-666 is contained and similar to the IKEA, it has to stay that way. Number 5 on this list is SCP-028. SCP-028 is hard to describe because it doesn't have any distinguishable qualities to it. It's located directly in the center of an abandoned storage yard, so one could make an argument that the center pocket of air is the item in question or that the entire storage yard is the problem. Either way, this thing definitely needs to get locked up forever. The Foundation writes, subjects entering SCP-028 are, within 3 to 6 seconds, struck by total and complete knowledge of a subject. This knowledge is thus far completely random in both size and usefulness, and sometimes goes unnoticed for extended periods of time. More profound knowledge generally has a stronger effect with some cases. This effect can be experienced multiple times by exiting and re-entering SCP-028, but can result in increasingly strong migraines and dizziness after 2 exposures. Now, you're probably thinking that this is freaking awesome and something that we should use to our advantage, but the problem is you don't get to decide what knowledge you attain. The Foundation did a few experiments with this thing and documented them. In one of those experiments, they say that the subject began to cry and went into a fetal position, showing signs of high distress. Unresponsive to questioning and outside stimulus for several days. Lapsed into catatonia shortly after stating that this is not life. Subject passed into a coma and died shortly after. Cause of death was attributed to shock. So that's kind of the big problem with something like this, guys. Learning everything about something sounds great in theory, but in practice might be too much for us to handle. We aren't omniscient beings, and potentially our bodies weren't made to be able to become omniscient beings. This is just one of those things that we aren't ready for yet. So for now, I say we gotta lock it up and not mess with it. Number 4 on this list is SCP-846. SCP-846 is honestly pretty cute. The Foundation writes, SCP-846 is a plastic toy robot measuring 20 centimeters in height and 5 centimeters in width. The bottom of SCP-846's right foot bears the text "Robo Dude, now with voice command action" by Dr. Wondertainment. Signs of paint chipping and minor damage to SCP-846 indicate that it's roughly 10 years old, although attempts to question SCP-846 on this have been ignored. So it's just a tiny little robot. How much harm can this thing cause? Answer: a lot. First off, when this thing is turned on, it appears to be so well programmed that some people think it's sentient. That hasn't been confirmed, but it responds very well to any question that's asked of it. Second, and most importantly, it has 350 robo-accessories. Okay, so what? A robo-accessory doesn't sound so bad. Well, how about if that robo-accessory is an atomic grenade? Flamethrowers, hydrogen guns, laser beams, you name it, this robot carries it. All you need to do is ask it to utilize one of its robo-accessories, and then out from its stomach pops whichever one you've requested. This tiny kid's toy is basically the world's largest and most advanced armory in the entire world. It has weapons that we're not even close to being able to comprehend, which are so powerful that they could literally end the world. If this toy was to end up in the wrong hands, then we might all be done for. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that whoever owns this robot could easily take over the world too. If you could threaten the use of an atomic grenade whenever you wanted, then you automatically become very powerful. Lock it away and throw away the key. Or honestly, better yet, maybe just destroy it. Number 3 on this list is SCP-155. SCP-155 is described by the Foundation as a complex electronic construct consisting of highly modified Cray CS6400 supercomputer, a dedicated radioisotope thermoelectric generator, and a device that has yet to be fully reverse engineered. SCP-155 was recovered from the basement of Prometheus's lab primary research laboratory by elements of Mobile Task Force MU-4 following the destruction of the facility and subsequent Foundation intervention. When a program and accompanying data is loaded into SCP-155 and executed, SCP-155 generates a spherical temporal distortion field with a radius of approximately 5 meters. Within this sphere of influence, the passage of time is rapidly accelerated, resulting in a hyperbolic increase in the effective processing power of SCP-155. Execution begins slowly as the processing hardware of SCP-155 is dated, but its effective processing power approaches infinity after approximately 8 minutes and 14 seconds of execution. From fragments of documentation recovered by Prometheus's lab, SCP-155 was used to perform massive calculation jobs that would have taken months, if not years, of processing time with conventional computing devices. So once again, guys, we are dealing with something that actually sounds incredible. A processor that is so fast it could change the way our world is run. However, as I'm sure you're guessing, there's a catch. The catch is that when this thing is used, it generates some radiation. A lot of radiation. The longer it processes, the more radiation is generated, and this can reach incredibly dangerous levels. It's even thought that if this thing was left processing for too long, then we could cause some world-ending scenarios. A processor that is so fast and smart, but also capable of totally changing our world's climate and killing all of us in the process. As tempting as it would be to use this thing and advance tons of stuff, it just isn't worth the risk. At the end of the day, our planet is the most important thing that we have. We have to protect it, and in this case, it means locking this thing up for good. Number 2 on this list is SCP-310. SCP-310 is extremely dangerous and needs to stay locked away forever. It's just a tall, white candle, nothing too intimidating on the surface. The flame on the candle isn't too big either, but it never goes out. Unless it's immersed in water or some other substance to inhibit the flame, this flame will always go. Even if you put it in water and then take it out, the flame will immediately reappear as if it was always there and never went out at all. This isn't too dangerous, just don't burn yourself on the candle. The problem is how this flame interacts with other flammable objects. The Foundation writes, any flammable or semi-flammable substance which comes into contact with SCP-310 becomes ignited with a slow-spreading fire. Unlike the flame of SCP-310, this fire cannot be extinguished by any known means other than exhausting its fuel supply. Experiments have shown that the fire will continue to burn even in a vacuum, underwater, in a nitrogen-saturated environment, under intense airflow, in a refrigerated environment, encased in a fire retardant covering, or any combination of the above. Only total consumption of all flammable material in contact with the flames will result in them becoming extinguished. Therefore, in the case of accidental ignition, especially of personnel, separating the lit section from the rest of the object as soon as possible is the only way to preserve the rest of the exposed object. So that means that once something gets lit with this flame, it's not gonna stop until it's completely destroyed. Think about how horrible that could be to society. You could burn down entire cities, maybe even countries to the ground with this one tiny little candle. Obviously, for this reason, it needs to be locked up forever, preferably in some water containment facility to prevent any accidents from potentially taking place. Number 1 on this list is SCP-173. Guys, I hate this SCP so much, just researching it gave me shivers. The Foundation says that it is constructed from concrete and rebar with traces of Krylon brand spray paint. SCP-173 is animate and extremely hostile. The object cannot move while within a direct line of sight. Line of sight must not be broken at any time with SCP-173. Personnel assigned to enter container are instructed to alert one another before blinking. Object is reported to attack by snapping the neck at the base of the skull or by strangulation. In the event of an attack, personnel are to observe Class 4 hazardous object containment procedures. They also go on to say that this thing excretes this reddish-brown liquid, which is apparently a mixture of feces and blood. So first off, this thing is absolutely disgusting. It literally sweats bloody poop and also looks like something picked straight out of hell. Second, the way it kills you is just terrifying. You literally can't ever stop looking directly at it. Directly at this gross creature that wants to murder you. If you blink, you die. If you lose focus for 1 second and you look anywhere else, you die. Honestly, I don't think that this thing needs to be locked up at all, it just needs to be flat out destroyed. If it was up to me, then I'd take SCP-310, the candle that we just talked about, and light this thing on fire so the only thing it can do is burn to death. There's no reason why we should keep this thing around. The only thing it's capable of doing is stinking up a room and killing people. Burn it with fire, and let's be done with it.
Number 5 on this list is SCP-048. I suppose that SCP-048 is a little bit of a stretch on this list because it isn't necessarily an object, but hear me out on this one. SCP-048 is basically the granddaddy of curses in the SCP Foundation. Now, there isn't an object or a room or a space that is cursed here, but it's actually a number. You see, the actual name itself, SCP-048, is what's cursed. And this is why it makes the list. Because if you were to label any item as SCP-048, then that item would automatically become cursed as well. If an item has been given the designation of SCP-048, then that item, through completely unforeseen circumstances, becomes destroyed, lost, stolen, decommissioned, or it's gonna have some other weird and unwanted thing happen to it. The SCP Foundation has had multiple important items get destroyed or lost by assigning them this designation and not realizing that there's a curse attached to it. Not only is it the item or thing that gets screwed over by this number though, it's also the personnel assigned to this item. If the Foundation labels something as SCP-048 and you're the unlucky bugger who has to watch over that item, then there is a 50% chance you will either be killed, be maimed, or be fired. This will be through some freak accident that is completely out of your control. In fact, there was one SCP doctor, Dr. Cortez, who claimed that this was all a bunch of superstition. He called everyone out on it and demanded that an unrevealed item be assigned to SCP-048. Well, as it would turn out, that SCP item that he referred to had earlier in the day accidentally been thrown in the trash. It would also turn out that later in the day, Dr. Cortez would have his arms horribly amputated in a freak break room blender accident. After this, the number was once again retired, and now no one has dared question its validity ever again. Number 4 on this list is SCP-093. SCP-093, even though it's an item, seems to really like what it looks like. The Foundation says SCP-093 is a primarily red disc covered from a red stone composite resembling cinnabar with circular engravings and unknown symbols carved at 0.5 centimeters depth around the entire object. Deeper cuts are present on SCP-093 with a depth of 1 to 1.5 centimeters. SCP-093 will change hue when held by a living individual. The colors taken by SCP-093 are still being researched to establish a link. Current beliefs holds that the changes depend upon regrets carried by the holder. If SCP-093 is removed from a mirror and not held by a person, it will seek out the nearest mirror-like surface. SCP-093 has been observed to travel in the largest possible circle while rolling, building up phenomenal speed. The mechanism of this acceleration is currently unknown. If any obstacle is between SCP-093 and the nearest mirror-like surface, it will use this momentum to punch through the object and continue on its course at this speed. It will only stop when a mirror-like surface is contacted. Despite tremendous impact velocities, no damage will be dealt to SCP-093 or the mirror. This thing turns into the greatest NFL linebacker in the world when it isn't either held or in contact with a mirror. It will literally bowl over or cut through anything to get in contact with a mirror again. Imagine if someone took this device and just dropped it in the streets of a crowded city or something. Boom. This thing flies across the street, cutting through civilians until it obliterates a car just so it can make contact with the side mirror. It's locked up right now with mirrors around it at all times for good reason. Number 3 in this list is SCP-117. SCP-117 is actually extremely useful. This item looks like a standard multi-tool device, like a standard Swiss Army knife sort of thing. The useful ability that it has is that it's actually capable of changing and morphing itself into the most useful tool it can be. So, what I mean by that is that if you have a job to do, like let's say you have to change a tire or something, well, SCP-117 will change itself into the perfect tool for you to get the job done. This obviously makes any handy person's life super easy and sounds like the best thing ever. Instead of having to lug around a toolbox and not even have the right tool for the job, you just need this one thing and it will do pretty much everything for you. There is, obviously, a catch though. The Foundation writes, after countless uses and testing with the SCP, it has been discovered to cause harm and possibly death to the user by means of absorbing iron, copper, calcium, and zinc from the user's body as long as the user is touching the device. Gloves seem to have no curbing effect on this, and the rate of absorption seems to depend on the tools used / created by SCP-113. It is advised that only Class D personnel are used in conjunction with this SCP to prevent death or injury to researchers. So basically, it's really easy to change a tire with this thing, but you're not going to be driving your car anytime soon if you do. Number 2 on this list is SCP-145. This is the worst phone call you will ever get. A standard 2002 model cordless telephone handset of Alcatel brand on its standard issue charging base. Not really that intimidating, right? Well, think again. The phone will ring periodically. If you pick up this phone, then you'll hear the voice of a very distraught female on the other line. She's so distraught because apparently she's just witnessed the most gruesome and horrible torture that you can imagine. What follows is a detailed description of all the brutal things that went down. Already pretty terrifying and depressing, but it gets even worse. Let's say you pick this phone up by yourself. Well, if you do, then that's most likely the last thing that you will ever do. Poof, up in smoke, you're gone now. As if you were never even there in the first place and you have been transported to a completely different location. Where that place is, no one has any idea, but we do know what happens to you. You now become the torture victim. So the next call that this woman makes, where she's crying and sobbing about what she just witnessed, all of the horrible pain she just saw, that's literally about you. Yeah, it's a pretty horrible way to go, guys. Now, if you are with someone when you pick the phone up, this won't happen. You'll just hear the voice, but you won't get transported to the torture chamber. The Foundation has actually tried to stop this whole operation before, but it's never really worked. They had somebody strap a bunch of C4 to themselves and then pick up the call, then explode when they got to the destination in hopes of destroying the chamber. It didn't work though, and my dude just blew up for no reason. Now, these calls go unanswered, which, based on the circumstances, is pretty much the right thing to do. And finally, number 1 on this list is SCP-882. SCP-882 is the creepiest set of gears you will ever run into. It's a bunch of gears that are totally rusted over and don't look to be in the best shape. Now, this is actually a good thing for us because these gears will start to move and do things if they aren't completely coated in rust. So, having this thing in seawater is very important. This isn't the scary curse about this thing though, it actually has some other unique properties that makes it very dangerous. The Foundation says any metal touching the object will become permanently affixed to it and over a period of a few days becomes a new part of the object. Organic material remains unaffected though. SCP-882 is extremely resilient with tensile strength and toughness above those of aircraft-grade titanium alloy by weight, even though its composition appears to be a random alloy of iron, tin, gold, and other metals, some as of yet unidentified. Extreme focused heat must be applied over several hours to cut even a small portion free of the main assembly. Persons remaining in the vicinity of the object for prolonged periods have developed auditory hallucinations while near the object. Mainly the sound of grinding and clicking. The sound intensifies and is abated only by throwing metal into the object. Subjects in an advanced state of psychosis have thrown themselves into the object, resulting in almost instant death by crushing. The body is often drawn in and impossible to recover. An ever-growing body of metal that will trick my brain into ending my life. That's what this SCP is, and it is a big no thank you from this guy.